Hello, guys, and welcome once again. Um, Now we're going to be diving deep into a really interesting topic. I think that we have everything we need in order to start understanding better this framework. We have been understanding a lot of basic foundations that we need in order to jump now into this more complex topic. So we're going to be introducing the MVC design pattern and also learning more about Razor Pages and how they really work behind the scenes. So we're going to be studying that. But before, I want to do a little recap of what we currently know at this point of time. So let's go there. So we finished up with this application. We started up with a basic console application because I wanted to teach you guys that with this .NET Core framework, we can start as a basic console app and we can start adding libraries, adding functionality to convert it into what we want in our corresponding scenario, in our specific situation. So for this example, we were creating a Razor Pages application, which is a web app. So we created our builder, which is of type web application, that this is going to basically abstract from us a lot of configuration, which is nice. Then on this builder, we are going to be adding the corresponding services that we want. In this specific scenario, we just want to add the Razor Pages services. So it is going to be injecting and registering everything that we need for using Razor Pages. We needed no more, so we can build our application. And now on this application, we can start configuring our HTTP request pipeline or middleware, which we studied the our past section, which was really interesting. And in here, we configured a couple of error handling middlewares that it's good to have at the top of our pipeline so that they can catch every possible error as we studied before. And then we simply used our map Razor Pages, which was going to be responsible of registering all our endpoints based on our pages that we created. We have not been understanding deeply what these pages is, but for now we just wanted to know that this is going to be responsible for basically telling our application that these pages are the ones that we are registering into our application, and in case an incoming request enters and matches some of these pages, then it should render the corresponding content, all right? And we ended up with our run method, which is going to basically block the calling thread, and it is going to start listening for HTTP requests. So that's a little bit of the recap about what we have been learning. And now I want to introduce you to the MVC design pattern, which is basically the design pattern in which the Razor Pages is built upon. So we're going to be understanding that, and it's going to be really interesting, so stick with me. Perfect. So we need to understand that we have an endpoint middleware, as we discussed in our previous video, right? And according to the definition, we have a endpoint middleware in where we include our business logic, which can take one of three possible forms. One is going to be Razor Pages, which are responsible for basically generating the server-side HTML templates that the users will see and interact with in the browser. We also can have a web API, which basically another machine is going to be consuming. Can be backend servers, can be mobile apps, can be a client framework, and we also can have a combination of both. At this point of time, we're going to be focusing mostly on Razor Pages, but we're going to be also exploring web APIs. So you can have the whole picture and the different tools that you can be using depending on your specific needs. So as I explained before, basically the Razor Pages is built upon a very popular design pattern, which is called MVC. And as you can see in the definition, it is commonly used for designing apps that have user interfaces or UIs, but this is not exclusive. We can also use this pattern for building web APIs that do not have a view, and we're going to be seeing that later on. But basically, this design pattern is composed of three main parts. We have the model, which can be seen as the global state of the application. This is usually stored in a database, which is accessed by a service and not directly by handlers. So we're going to be explaining what a handler is, what a service is. But basically, this is going to englobe all our business logic. We also have the view, which is going to be basically the template that displays the data provided by the model. And finally, we have the controller, which is in charge of updating the model and also provide the data so that the Razor page can display it. So the controllers are also called page handlers, and they can be seen as the bridge between the view and the model. All right. So this can be maybe seen a little bit abstract if you haven't heard this pattern before or have not worked with it. But we're going to be explaining deeply how it works and how it is adapted to .NET Core. So do not worry. But for now, I want you to just have the definition in mind. I would like to explain it a little bit further, the MVC design pattern with this design, that I think that it might be easier to understand. So as I explained before, the controller is like the main point or entry point, which is going to serve as the bridge between the model and the view, right? So basically the controller is going to receive the request. Then based on the request that is entered, we're going to invoke some services that they're going to fetch information or update information in the model, which most likely is going to be information that is stored in a database. So then this can be seen as the first step of the process, and after that is done, then basically the controller is going to pass a representation of the model to the view. So the view is going to finally generate the template using the model that we passed. So it's like a two-step process in which in both of them the controller is participating. First, passing the request so that the service can act based on that. And after that, once there is a response, then it is going to use that representation of the model or the response and give it to the view. So it basically can be seen as a piece of the architecture that is staying in the middle of both, enabling the conversation and separating the concerns and responsibilities, okay? So now, as I said before, Razor Pages are built upon the MVC framework, in which you can clearly see a separation of concerns, and in order to understand Razor Pages, we need to understand two main concepts. One is routing, and the other one is model binding. In this specific lecture, we're going to be exploring a little bit of routing. But before we go there, I need you to understand a couple of things. We declared our pages folder that are going to be containing all the Razor pages. So the CS HTML file is going to be the markup that is going to be sent to the client. But we also have this file, which is a page model. These are considered or known as code behind files that have the exact same name as the Razor page in this case, but they have the .cs extension. And then we also have methods that are known as page handlers that will define how to handle the requests accordingly. So for example, as you can see in here, we have a couple of page handlers, which both of them are going to be executed for specific scenarios. This is going to be executed for a request that is regarding the HTTP verb get method, and this one for the post method. Later on, we're going to be exploring what happens if, for example, we have like two methods for the same HTTP verb method. For example, two on get handlers, because, for example, one can be to get all the information and the other one can be, for example, for retrieving a specific record by the ID of the record, and so on and so forth. So this can be really flexible, and we're going to be understanding that later. But for now, what I want you to know is that there is going to be always this page model file, which is going to be sitting behind the Razor page and having the .cs extension, and that it is going to be having a couple of methods which are known as page handlers that are going to act as soon as the request enters our application. And we can say that whenever a request enters the application, a Razor page is executed. But what actually is going on behind the scenes is that an instance of the page model is created, and then the corresponding page handler is executed. So we're going to see that later in action. But that's what I really want you to understand at this point of time. Now, by having a little understanding on what a page model and page handlers are, we can start exploring more about routing. So basically, routing is the process of mapping an incoming request to a Razor page. One important thing to note is that in this diagram, you're going to be seeing this dictionary. And this is done by the endpoint middleware. So when we did this in our project and we set map Razor pages, this is going to create this dictionary that it is going to register all the routes and all the endpoints in a dictionary. So the routing middleware is going to compare the incoming request to the routes that are in the dictionary, and in case there is a Razor page that matches the incoming request, then it is going to note down in the HTTP context object that we have started before. It is going to say, hey, this specific Razor page is the one that the user is requesting. And also it is going to write down some other important information, like, for example, the HTTP verb method. And in case there are other information that we need to take a look into, for example, is there information in the request body? Are there any query strings in the request? And some other information that, based on that, is how the framework knows which handler to invoke. Uh, this is a little bit like more advanced, but I want you to know the difference because the routing middleware is going to uh, write down this information of the request which Razor page should be executed. And now you know that when we say this, behind the scenes, a page model is going to be created, and then the corresponding page handler is going to be executed. But how do we know, uh, for example, that in this case, we set privacy? Uh, we can use this index one, for example. So the routing middleware wrote down that we need to execute this Razor page, but then when it comes to our page model, how does it know uh, which of these two it needs to execute? Now this is the responsibility of the endpoint middleware. The endpoint middleware is going to look up into the information that the routing middleware wrote down. For example, it said that you need to execute this Razor page, and also that the request is for a get method. So the endpoint middleware comes down and says, oh, okay, awesome. So I need to execute this specific piece of code. So as you can see, the responsibilities are separated, and that's how the framework knows which specific page handler to execute inside what specific Razor page, based on the information that comes from the request that the routing middleware enrich the HTTP context object with that information of which Razor page to execute, another information, for example, the HTTP verb, and if there's extra information, for example, in the query string or in the body or in the form, or some other sources that we're going to be exploring later. And based on that, it is going to write down all our information, and the endpoint middleware is going to execute the corresponding handler based on the information that is in the HTTP context object. So that's why it is so important to understand the middleware that we studied in the lecture before, because as this is executing as a pipeline, it is really important that the endpoint middleware is executed after the routing one, because this one is going to first write down important information that otherwise the endpoint middleware will not know what to execute if it doesn't have that information beforehand. So like all the pieces start to fit together slowly, as you can see, and it's really interesting to know and understand deeply how this framework works behind the scenes, because that's like the pros and cons, because it gives you a lot of functionality out of the box. But the cons is that if you do not really understand how it is achieving that behavior, then for example, if there is a bug, there is some unexpected behavior, and it is coming from functionality that was given to us, and we do not understand how it works, then it will be really difficult to solve these issues. So yeah, this is what I wanted you to know about routing, at least for now, and let's move on. All right, so now that we have studied a little bit about the structure of Razor pages, the MVC design pattern, which is what the Razor pages use behind the scenes, and also understood a little bit how routing plays a part into this process, and how a Razor page is executed. So what happens before the code goes and says, oh, I need to execute this specific Razor page. Having that all in mind, then we can start digging a little bit more into Razor pages. So what I want to explain now is that we already saw what we need to do in order to use Razor pages into our application. First, we need to add the add Razor Pages into our dependencies container in our services. After that, we need to use our map Razor Pages to register all the pages, the routes, and the endpoints in the dictionary. And after that, we need to use the opinionated structure for registering our routes inside the pages. So this one is going to be executed for the home. So to say, the route just like this, right? These ones are going to be executed for errors and also for status codes that we studied the lection before about middlewares. And then this one is going to be executed whenever we want to search for the resources or the resource of books. So this is how you start implementing your routes and your routing system, right? And now I want to explain a little bit more about the page handlers and the page model, because this is really important to understand. So basically, the role of the handler, that we can also say that it is the controller in the MVC pattern, is to coordinate the generation of a response to the request that it is handling. So it is going to also have another responsibilities. For example, validating that the data in the model in the binding model, is valid, that we're going to be exploring later. Also, it invoke the appropriate actions on the application model via services that we are also going to be studying later on. It also selects an appropriate response to generate based on the application model response. Also, after the call to the model has been made, then a view model needs to be generated, which basically refers to a single object that is passed to the Razor view to render. So in Razor Pages, the page model acts as the view model, and the view can access the necessary data through exposed properties. So for example, we can define an object in this page model called books. Then that property called books is going to be filled by a service. So we're going to have a service, so to say, book service. So let's say that this is an interface of our service, and we're going to call the method get all books, for example. And then we're going to be having a property that is called books, right? And this is like a simple representation because we need to set up some other things. But what I want you to understand is that we can have a variable or a view model in here that is going to be getting the information via services. So we're going to have a book service that has a lot of methods. For example, get all books, get book by ID, create new book, delete book, and then that logic is separated from our handler or our controller, so that the only important aspect that the controller needs to know is that it needs to register the service of the books. And for example, on the onGet, we can do this. We can call our service to fetch all the books, for example, right? And then as we already have the representation that we want to send over to the view, we need to send it to the view so the view can render it. So there are multiple ways of doing that, but for now I just want you to start like understanding the different pieces that play a role into this process. So we're going to have the handler. Depending on the handler that it is going to be invoked, Then we also have a service that the service is going to be um, doing all the business logic for us, which is completely separated from the controller. Once this service is done and it fetches for us all the information, we're going to store it somewhere. It can be in a variable, then we can pass that information. It can be in a view model that the view can access to, and we're going to be seeing that later. And then we need to prepare the information. And how does that work? We can achieve that by using some methods that are provided by the page model, right? And that they are of type of iAction result, okay? Which is basically defines a contract that represents the result of an action method. What it's doing for us is an interface that defines a generic HTTP response. So it allows us developers to flexibly return different type of HTTP responses from web API methods or controllers. So the page handler is not the one that is generating the response. It is actually the iAction result that is returned by the page handler that, when executed by the Razor Pages infrastructure, it will generate the response for us. So the page model provides different helper methods for generating responses, and we can see a couple of them. So for example, if we call page result, and we pass books, for example, then it is going to generate an HTML view for an associated Razor page. So it is going to basically tell this Razor page to render, and we can pass it whatever we want, and then we can have access to that in our view. We also can use redirect to page, and then in here we include to which page we want to redirect. For example, indicating the user that it should be redirected to a different page in our application. So in case a user is not authorized in our application and we are handling a method in our controller that needs authentication, the user is not authenticated in the system, then we can use this to redirect them to the login page. And there's more methods that we can use depending on our needs. These two are like the most popular ones or the most used ones. And I know I don't want you to feel maybe overwhelmed by too much information. So I think that at this point of time we have studied a lot of things, right? So by making a little bit of a recap, we saw that Razor Pages is built upon the MVC design pattern, which is basically going to divide our concerns into separate areas. First, we have the controller that is going to receive the requests. It is going to be serving as a bridge between our model and our view. So it is going to receive the request. It is going to call the model. The model is going to do all the business logic, database connections, fetching data, updating data, and we access that most likely via services. And then the model is going to return to the controller with the data, for example, in this case with the books. And then the controller is going to prepare the data and send it to the view, right? And as we saw before, this is what a Razor page looks like. This one is the markup. Then it is going to have a page model behind of it, which is going to have a group of handlers that the handlers are going to be executed depending on the request that is entering into our application, in which the middleware also takes an important role, because the routing is going to specify which Razor page must be executed, and then the endpoint middleware is the one that is going to select the corresponding handler to be executed depending on some information like the HTTP method or like the the request body in case it was, also query strings and some other information. And based on that, it is going to execute the corresponding handler. And then we can return a method which is provided by the page model, so that when the Razor Pages infrastructure runs, it is going to execute the method and basically return the corresponding response to the client or the view. All right. So that's like a little summary of what we have been studying in this lecture. I know that it might be a lot of information, and but I really think it is important to understand the differences uh, between every step of the way, the responsibilities of all the different entities that play a role in this kind of architecture, and having that understood will help getting like a grip on the following terms and things that we're going to be studying. So I think that it's a good pace, and by now we have like a lot of understanding that we did not have earlier. So I think it's a lot of progress. So I hope that you are enjoying the series. Please ask me anything if you have any doubts, and I'm going to be reaching as soon as possible. And thank you for being with me in one more video, and I'm looking forward to continue with this series. So thank you.